All right, howdy there, folks. So this is a talk that I just gave, but it didn't get recorded, so I'm going to go ahead and give it again. All right, so my name is Ryan Rutherford. I'm the co-owner of an ecological consulting firm, Biophilia LLC, and I do work throughout the entire UP and the North Woods region, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I've lived here in Ontonagon County for the past 3 years, but I've done consulting work here since the mid-2000s, mostly with the U.S. Forest Service. Also seeking a doctorate from Michigan Tech University, doing an ecological and conservation study on granite bedrock lakes. And tonight's talk about the highlights of Ontonagon County. So I'm first to deliver an overview, and then talk about unique areas that occur here, and then a little bit about the biodiversity found here in the county, and then a vision I have for this place in the future. All right, so as we step back, this is the location of the county. So you can see we're in a densely forested area to the north of us. In Canada is the boreal forest. You can see that really dark, dense green. That's mostly a spruce and fir, conifer-dominated forest. To the south of us, it's a little bit lighter green. That's mostly deciduous trees. And we're kind of right at the transition zone between the two. But right here in Ontonagon County, we have a lot more deciduous than coniferous. You can also see a lot of the lighter green to the south of us is grassland dominated, formerly prairie. Now it's mostly agricultural grasses. And getting a little bit finer in scale, you can see the county outline here goes all the way up almost to the north shore of Minnesota. And we have a county boundary with Cook County. That's the county that includes the boundary waters, the Canadian border, much of the north shore of Minnesota, and we also get pretty close to Isle Royale. And by land area, it's a little over 1,300 square miles, but if you include the water boundary, it's double that, and it's the largest county east of Minnesota. As we go in a little bit further, the features start to become a lot more recognizable. What strikes out most to me about our county is just the large blocks of intense forest. So you see that nice pea green color, those are large, mostly forested areas with relatively little roads, minor roads. You can also see the white pine mine tailings area, which I'll be talking about, Lake Ogievik, the largest inland lake in the UP. There's not a whole lot of natural inland lakes, a lot more of them to the south and to the east, where we had ice contact zones. So the glacier didn't spend a whole lot of time lingering in the county. And if we want to look at land ownership, here we go. So it's mostly federal land in the tan there. That's U.S. Forest Service land, Ottawa National Forest. The red is state parks, so that's going to be the Porcupine Mountain State Park entirely. There's a little bit of state forest land. There's also a lot of commercial timberland, particularly in the northeast, which is actually a pretty remote part of the county. And there are several conservation easements, mostly around the Porcupine Mountain borderlands. And all that white you see here is privately owned land, so those are mostly smaller tracts. Undoubtedly, the most famous area we have here is the Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park. It is around 60,000 acres. Around 35,000 of that is old growth, which makes it the largest tract of old growth forest in the whole deciduous forest biome, so kind of the whole eastern half of the U.S. So obviously really special because of that. On this aerial photo, we can pick out several features. You can see some lakes, wetlands in the interior. This is also where most of the hardwood dominated forest is. So this is mostly old growth sugar maple. You see this lighter pea green in the interior. Near the coast, it's a little bit darker. That's mostly hemlock dominated old growth forest. And you can see areas that are younger here that have been cut out. So this has been a state park for about 80 years. So these timber harvests would have been prior to that. You can still see the hemlock has not regenerated. It's not a quickly recovering forest type. Here's a few shots of sugar maple there. on the left, and some hemlock basswood forest on the left. So that's mostly down near the coastline. In the interior, where the sugar maple is, there's often a lot more snow, so very different microclimate there. But in old growth in general, there's a lot of different microclimates. So you have large trees, you have smaller trees, you have a lot of deadfall, and you've got kind of a locally humid environment, particularly in the lower parts of trees and around tree bases. So we don't have much in terms of animals that are old growth dependent or birds, perhaps a few insects, but one group that really strikes out as having a lot of species in old growth are lichens. And it's not just the age of the trees, it's about forest continuity. So places that have been forest for a long time with a mostly intact canopy can have extremely rich assemblage of lichens. So these are some old growth obligate species from the Rickosolia corpusans, the lungwort here on the left, the smooth lungwort. Citralia chickpea, that's a type of sea storm lichen, another spectacular one. We've got Lobaria pulmonaria, very famous lichen here, that nice green lettucey color, and then a couple more obscure ones like Rhinodina and Basidia, rubella, and some of the stubble lichens here. So there's a couple dozen species that are strongly associated with old growth, and you rarely find it outside of that forest type. So I'm not going to go very deep into lichen biology. They're a symbiotic organism that's mostly fungus, but what I want you to come away from this as they're extremely ecologically sensitive, and I tell you a lot about an area's microclimate. There's also cliffs in the Porcupine Mountains that have abundant lichens and rare plants, and also other rock outcrop features such as waterfalls. And these have their own very unique environment. They get quite hot in the summertime. They're subjected to extremely high winds. They're an extreme environment. A lot of the trees that grow on the cliffs can achieve extremely old age. There's cedars and junipers and some of the pines that are undoubtedly very old. And there are a whole unique suite of lichens in this false fisherman's lichen here, Psora pseudo-russellii. That's a new state record that occurs on coast of the Porkies. There are a few other species too that are recent state records, so very unique and largely unexplored substrate in terms of rare biodiversity. Up on top of the cliffs, there is a unique insect community. It's much warmer. It's kind of a warm bubble in a largely cool landscape. And one animal that lives up there is the hoary elf. So this is a Barron's rock outcrop species. They feed on a shrub called bearberry. And I suspect they've been negatively influenced by this human foot traffic. So this is a very popular spot for people. A lot of the shrubs and low plant life get easily trampled. And this is one sensitive species that might be impacted by that. There's also a wonderful assemblage of breeding birds. I did the breeding bird survey there in the mid-2000s, had around 85 to 90 species. Unique ones such as this white-ringed crossbill here with the crossover bill that it uses for prying open spruce cones, the black-backed woodpecker. A few more common warblers there. This is a rough-leg hawk. So there's also a pretty good hawk migration that occurs in the Porcupine Mountains along the cliffs. I spent one spring doing raptor surveys for them, and noted a lot of rough-leg hawks, bald eagles, even a few golden eagles migrating along the cliffs. They will migrate in the fall too, but it's mostly a spring phenomenon in Porcupine Mountains. So much less well known, but just as ecologically significant are the Trap Hills, and this is mostly federally owned. This is mostly owned by the Ottawa National Forest, kind of stretches between the towns of Berglund and Rockland, Michigan, and it's composed of these northeast, southwest trending escarpments. So that where Trap Hills comes from, the traps or escarpments. And you can see that light pea green color. They're coated mostly in hardwood forest, the upland sugar maple dominated hardwood forest. Very rich assemblage of plants that are associated with that habitat. Lower areas are mostly a coniferous mixed forest, but still have a very unique flora as well. Springtime is my favorite there. It's absolutely incredible in spring for wildflowers, including my favorite down here in the lower left, Cluncia parviflora, the small flowered blue-eyed Mary. There are only only about an inch or two tall. They bloom really early in the spring up on cliff tops. The early buttercup occurs there, only location in EP where this plant occurs. Other plants such as the yellow trout lily, there's a burnt orange variant that occurs there. That's absolutely lovely, and the beauties there are so abundant. You walk through on a spring day, you just are engulfed by a very pleasant aroma. And it's just a wonderful place to be early on in spring. So part of my work with the Forest Service has been doing rare plant surveys. I've been doing that for the last decade. I've done many projects throughout the million-acre national forest, but never have I found anywhere close to as many rare plants as I did this year in Trap Hill. So these are rare plant dots from my colleague Sue Troll put this map together. And this shows just a sampling of a lot of new populations that I find. You got, the Western monkey flower is a rare one here. That's Basie's pondweed on top. Most unique one is upper center right here. That's the showy orchis Galearis spectabilis. It's a plant that was presumed to be extirpated from the national forest, but I found a couple patches in a ravine in the Trap Hills this summer. There's also male fern, broadleaf beech fern here in the corner, a couple other rare plants. The bottom center here is a white ash glade, a pretty unique community that's found probably only in the Trap Hills and nowhere else in the state. There's also shaded cliffs. And there's exposed cliffs too, including the highest cliffs in the state. And the rock type is very different. Whereas the Porcupine Mountains, they're composed of basalt and conglomerate. The Trap Hills are composed of rhyolite. It's a much harder rock chemically. It's the same as granite, just much finer grain. And some of these cliffs have probably been exposed since the glaciers left, which has allowed lichens to colonize and then grow extremely slowly. Some of them have like be over 1,000 years old, possibly. That's not confirmed, but certainly hundreds, probably older than most, if not all, of our trees. Individual patches of lichen. They're deeply embedded into that rock. They have tiny little fungal hyphae that can penetrate the intergranular crystals of the rock and grow at fractions of a millimeter per year. So, pretty amazing organism upon these cliffs. Down below the cliffs, there are talus slopes. So this looks like just a jumble of rocks, and yeah, that basically is what you're looking at. But they're slabs that have exfoliated off of the cliff faces in large piles. We probably have more of this habitat than anywhere else in the state, and it contains a unique lichen and plant community. Probably the most spectacular plant that occurs in the Trap Hills in terms of its surprise factor. Why is this here? Because it occurs in the western U.S. in the coastal ranges and the northern Rockies, and it appears in the western part of the EP. Pretty amazing plant, and we call this a disjunct, a plant that has an isolated population that's far from the main area of distribution. It's the Hooker's fairy bells. And found several new populations of this plant this year. It's found in sugar maple hardwood forests that tend to get a lot of snowfall. So up at the higher elevations under sugar maple, in a pretty moderated environment that gets covered with snow early in the season. The snow melts off late. There's other rare plants that occur in that habitat too. Showy orchis is found roughly in that same area, but it's a southern plant, so it's probably more adapted for a warmer climate. But that blanket of snow that we get up there really insulates that leaf layer. So the ground it seldom freezes at all. Sometimes it might if we get a hard freeze without snowfall. But normally, like this year, we get pounded with snow before it gets cold. So that's going to form a blanket and protect that plant. You can see it's disjunct by quite a bit from its range in the southern part of Wisconsin, and most of its range is down in the Appalachian Mountains. So there's a bird found there that's pretty rare elsewhere in the state of Philadelphia vireo. It's probably more abundant in Trap Hills than anywhere else in the state. They're hard to detect. They sound a lot like the much more common red-eyed vireo, and they tend to spend their time way up in the canopy, so a really hard one to detect, but a pretty deep population that occurs there. All right, so next I'll talk about an area that's very different. It's not part of the national forest. It's mostly privately owned. It's called the Ewan Clay Plain. You can see patches of forest along the streams. You can see farms in the uplands, and there's a lot more people that live here. So this is what a lot of it looks like. So it's been called the Donut Hole of Ottawa National Forest. So there's this area right in the center of the forest that's about 20 miles long and about 12 miles from north to south. It's mostly private. And it's got thick clay soils that were deposited from a post-glacial lake. It's mostly a mix of hay, young forest, shrubland, some wetlands, beaver ponds. And it once supported a huge a grove of white pines, but they were cut over 100 years ago, about 120, 130 years ago, totally wiped out. Reportedly, they were some of the largest anywhere. But it's turned into something else of value. So this is an area with rather non-intensive agriculture, not a whole lot of pesticide use, if any. The farms tend to be small and family owned, so it's not a place where you have industrial agriculture. This is a good example to see what maybe a lot of the Midwest looked like, 100 years ago before heavy machinery really took over. And it's a good example of human and nature coexistence. So it's a place I spent quite a bit of time doing breeding bird surveys. So we have here is a Nashville warbler on top, and at the bottom is a golden wing warbler. And this might be some of the best habitat in the state for this species. If you really try, you can find a few dozen singing males in that area in the breeding season. They like young aspen in shrubby areas, and there's ample habitat for them. A lot of the habitat that they're using is on former farms that have been abandoned, regenerating in the forest. So they're kind of more of a forest edge species. So perfect habitat for them there. There's also surrogate grasslands that have a lot of birds that are uncommon elsewhere, including this stick thistle here. This is a LeConte sparrow out in a wet hayfield, which are more of a specialist on northern grasslands. Certainly a unique one to have here. The western meadowlark, a lot of birds on fence posts. There's a lot of old fence posts. And there has been a farm for a long time. There was a population of a sharp-tailed grouse there, but they haven't been seen for 25, 30 years, and they're certainly extirpated now. Other birds, we got bobolink here, a brewer's blackbird, eastern meadowlark, a grasshopper sparrow, and a loggerhead shrike. That was the first record for the county. So it's an interesting mix of species. I've had around 150 species in this Ewan grasslands area over the last 10 years of doing surveys, and a lot of the species are pretty uncommon in areas that have a lot more heavy agriculture. So an area that used to be giant white pines is now an interesting spot for grassland birds. All right, so getting even further to the disturbance spectrum here, this is about as disturbed as you can get. So the white pine mine was once the largest employer in the county, but this mine has been abandoned for the last 25 years. It was a copper mine and went very deep. They brought up a lot of material, they pulverized it, extracted the copper, and what was left is this waste product called tailing. So it's very fine, almost powdery material that kind of turns into this gray clay when you mix it in with water, and it's been deposited in these basins. So this area we're looking at, you can see it from space. It's about an 8,000 acre area. And it's been pretty much off limits to the public. So generally don't let people in there, but I get in to do bird surveys for a couple of years, and what I found was pretty astounding. Reported over 200 species of birds there. There's around 40 to 50 trumpeter swarms that spend their summers there. There's a lot of waterfowl, particularly in spring and fall migration. Lots of sandhill cranes raising babies. There's pelicans. Pelicans. You might not know we have pelicans in the EP, but here's over 50 of them. They're becoming more and more common. I think it's only a matter of time before they actually start breeding here. A lot of shorebirds too. So this might be considered the best site for migratory shorebirds in the Lake Superior Basin. and a lot of bears, also a lot of wolves. It's an area that's surrounded by much more intact ecosystems, so they can spread into this area, and there's hardly any people there. There's just the caretaker who pedals around on his motorbike, and that's about it, kind of patrolling it to keep people out. So it's basically a haven for wildlife without any people. We also have coastal wetlands that are very important for fish spawning. So we did some minnow trapping, my son and I, the past couple of years at our place there at the mouth of the Mineral River. So on top, we've got the brook stickleback, 9-spine stickleback, 3-spine stickleback, all three species that occur in our region. We got in our same minnow trap. You're not going to get that typical lake or beaver pond. So very, very high fish diversity, a lot of otters, and you can see them mink right there. They frequent these sort of wetlands. And the beaches are important habitat for migratory shorebirds, a buff-breasted sandpiper, which spends its summers up on the Arctic and its winters down in the Austral region, Argentina. And down in the red corner is state threatened species, the red knot making a stopover. So these pictures are both taken at the beach right in Ontonagon. This area suffered a lot of shoreline erosion the past few years when the lakes were at a very high level. A lot of people lost a good chunk of property. And since then, the lakes have gone down. They're actually a little bit below average at this moment. And so it's a good time to rehabilitate. So this is what I've done. I've been planting sprigs of American dune grass. Ammophila does a really terrific job of colonizing bare sand. And that kind of paves the way for other plants to move in. So it's a good opportunity to get that shoreline stabilized. And when the lake comes up again, it might be a little bit more protected. Now moving on to the Ontonagon River watershed, just a behemoth of a watershed, goes all the way into Wisconsin, covers about a 5-county area. Absolutely amazing, over 1,300 square miles, largest on the south shore of Lake Superior, over 200 lakes. Contains lots of wonderful areas that we've talked about, such as the Trap Hill, the Sylvania, the Military Bluffs, countless waterfalls. It's been designated a National Wild and Scenic River. There's lake sturgeon that have been reintroduced there. It's also home to the wood turtle, and I call it the Amazon of Northwood. It's incredibly biodiverse. Rarely do you get a watershed on planet Earth anywhere that's this intact with that much natural vegetation. That's in this good of ecological shape. It's really amazing. It's just a plethora of biodiversity there. There's the Kundakoon Falls, lots and lots of waterfalls, probably over 100 waterfalls in that area. And these are the military bluffs. So think of big sloughing clay banks, such as this. We get a heavy rain here, you get large chunks of land coming off. The soil is not stable, but it's an interesting spot for plants, like the shorty lady flipper right here. And it's a little bit more calcium here, so it's an interesting environment. It's also the realm of the very special wood turtle. It's been a candidate for federal listing for quite a while, and we probably have the very best populations in the entire world here. So a little bit about their nesting ecology. They come out on beaches early on in the summer where they nest. And for these guys, the wilder the better. The most remote beach is exactly where you want to go in nesting season if you want to find them. They do not do well with intense human disturbance. And in fact, where there's road crossings, such as right here, we see a lot of mortality. So we've worked with the Forest Service to install fencing at a lot of these sites, and that keeps turtles from going on to the road, kind of keeps them on to the riverside, and it's actually worked really well. So at this site, they nest on the riverside fence. They don't really go over it anymore, and we've seen a great reduction in road mortality at this site. There's also the problem of non-native species encroachment, particularly from green canary grass, which tends to crowd out the beaches, totally covers the sand and makes them inhospitable for nesting. So this is a grass that was not here even a decade ago. It was pretty uncommon, but it's really moved in. It might be a losing battle, but work we've done with the Forest Service has shown it's probably worth controlling it at some of these beaches. So this is an area they had a lot of it. This was an area that that had been sprayed. You can see all the dead vegetation. Doesn't have the canary grass anymore. And this is a site that was dominated by canary grass that is now good for turtle nesting. Once again, you can see all the tracks in the sand in their nesting here again. So that we're very happy to see that. A little bit about what's found here, and I think it's really good to kind of expand our horizons in terms of what species are out there, because those that we tend to monitor, those that we tend to base entire conservation projects around, I think in a lot of cases, if not most cases, the wrong species are picked. And I think it's really important to get at those that are most ecologically sensitive, what we call indicator species or even keystone species. So species that you would protect. If you protect that one kind, then the whole community gets protected. That's kind of what you want to do as a conservation biologist. And I think the more we know about what's in our area, the better in that regard. So just a little bit about what's found here. We've got 12 different kinds of amphibians, 7 reptiles. We've done a pretty intensive herp survey, so we're pretty confident these are the numbers, although there's a couple that come pretty close, but don't quite make it in the county that could eventually make it here. Mammals, we don't have the exact numbers, but one thing to take note of are the presence of large megafauna, such as moose. In the center there, you can see the scat. I don't have a moose picture from the county. All these pictures are mined from the county, by the way, in case you're wondering. Moose, we tend to see more in the southern part of the county, the Cogiba County line, which is also much higher elevation. You get a lot more snow too, generally. And you see some wolf tracks here, quite a few wolves in the county, and they need those large blocks of habitat to survive. A lot of places, particularly in the United States, are lacking that. But we have them here, and also things like pine marten. There's a dead roadkill one that I found a few years ago in Ottawa National Forest. And lots of otters, and ermine, snowshoe hare, of course, deer. All right, so for insects, these are very rough estimates, but an insect colleague of mine got me conceptualizing what we should expect for species diversity. So I come up with probably at least 1,500 species of Lepidoptera and at least 9,000 overall species of insects. We have nice diversity of pollinators, so that's been a concern in the last few years, the disappearance of pollinators. A lot of that is related to insecticide use, sadly, but we don't really have that here. We still have lots of bumblebees, over 10 species. Lots of mosquitoes too, as you can see pictured there. But for every insect that bites us, there's at least 1,000 that have nothing to do with us whatsoever, and a lot of those are performing very essential ecosystem functions. So it's really important to continue to monitor insects and consider them in any conservation plans. So over 1,200 species of vascular plants for sure, maybe upwards of 1,500, possibly even more than that. That's kind of an estimate. A lot of mixture of deciduous and boreal zone species, some western, southern disjunct. So really an interesting mix. A lot of sedges, a lot of ferns. Really an amazing county for plants. And fungi, boy, I can't even put a ballpark number on it, but it's certainly going to be thousands. This also includes lichens. I'd say lichens are probably 400 or 500 species for the county at least, and then other fungi probably several times more than that. So a lot of diversity. A lot of fungi are mycorrhizal, so they have very strong associations with plants. Plants couldn't survive without them. So very vital part of the ecosystem. We do have a set bird list, set 700 or 279 species recorded, including this ovenbird. There's their nest. They're shaped like a little oven. So we have particularly very high breeding bird diversity, some of the highest in North America. So much higher than regions to the south of us, for sure, particularly with wood warblers. Over 20 species of wood warblers in the county. And for anyone interested, there are a couple of sources we can find out what's being seen. So there's eBird. Not a whole lot of people read report their sightings from the county. There's mostly just a few of us. You can also see places to go and see birds, some of the hot spots around it. So that's kind of neat too. There's pictures and audio recordings as well on there. There's also iNaturalist, a little bit more recent tool, but it's really caught on in popularity in recent years. We have over 2,000 species documented from the county on there by photos and all that you need to do. Just like eBird, you get an app for your phone and you can use it in the field wherever you are. And a great opportunity to learn as well. You can see what's being seen in the county. All right, so just to the south of us in Wisconsin, the Ontonagon National Forest, there's an Aldo Leopold nature trail, the famous conservationist, and a lot of quotes on the sign. So I took a picture of this one, mostly because it's covered in lichen, and obviously I really love lichens. So it just says the thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And on that note, I'll just ask the question: how do we best conserve this area? There's been all kinds of methods to conserve biodiversity. You know, which one would work the best here? So the good news is we're in pretty good ecological shape, right? Pretty low human density, some very ecologically significant areas, the Porcupine Mountains, the National Wild and Scenic River designation and the Ontonagon. So really some of the crown jewels of the county are protected. There's special interest areas in the Trap Hills, which don't allow timber harvest. So there certainly are refuges. There's also been a couple of newly proposed wilderness areas, one in the Trap Hills area and another one south of the Porcupine Mountains. So I mean, there's a couple approaches to conservation. You know, there's certainly a lot more than that, but I'll talk about these two. So there's a strict protection of small areas, which has been done with some success, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot if you're not protecting a greater area. Species need to be able to shift their ranges, migrate, and let's face it, we're getting close to pushing 8 billion people on the planet. Biodiversity is going to persist. It needs to do so in close proximity to humans. So one plan that kind of recognized this is the Biosphere Reserve program, which is international. And it's all about kind of establishing that balance. So humans living in close proximity to nature while preserving core areas, and other areas have a little bit more intensive human use. They're under local jurisdiction. They can be withdrawn, so they're entirely locally controlled. And we already have 2 of them in Michigan. So Isle Royal is a biosphere reserve, and so is the Michigan Biological Station in northern Lower Michigan. And there's currently over 700 worldwide. There are places where people live. And as I explained, the concept is you have a core area where your most sensitive species are, or places that are really remote that can act as refugia for your most sensitive species. And then those that can live with humans, you have a little bit less footprint, and then of course you've got towns and communities, kind of all within one bundle. But the point is, this is an area that you have monitoring, and it's a spot you can kind of try experimental approaches. But the important thing is monitoring. You've got to keep monitoring to see that you're not doing any damage. So that's kind of the trick. And there's been lots and lots established throughout the world. From there now. So what I'll just leave you with is why not have a biosphere reserve right here in Ontonagon County with the Porcupine Mountains and the lovely Ontonagon River watershed. So yeah, just chew on that for a little bit. I've thought of a lot of approaches. The wilderness areas would be great, certainly, but I think this takes a lot into account. As I just demonstrated, there's nature can co-occur with some pretty intensive human uses. For other species like those old growth forest lichens, they really can't. They really need to be set aside. You really can't go through and do a rotational timber harvest and hope to keep them as part of your system. So you really kind of need to consider different levels of human involvement when preserving biodiversity. So this is my proposal for this very special part of the world. have a good